Good evening to all of you. First off, I would like to welcome all of you here on behalf of the Turkish Policy Center. My name is Ata Akiner, and I'm the president of the Turkish Policy Center. I think the crowd size today here is a good indication of how important the issue we are discussing here today is. As you know, the title of today's discussion is Turkey at the Nexus of Corruption and Construction, Views from Ankara and Washington, D.C. To discuss the subject, we have gathered here today a distinguished panel, one that is truly global in its composition. I welcome all of our speakers here and thank them for being here. Before we go any further, though, I have some announcements. I'm saddened to inform you that one of our panelists, Dr. Ümit ÖZCAN, has experienced a serious accident. She has broken her backbone and is undergoing surgery today. So I wish her geçmiş olsun and hope she experiences a speedy recovery. Also, one of our other panelists, Arzu Tekin, will not be joining us as well. She's unfortunately sick. So we have, but no worries, we still have 5 panelists here, as you can see. So we have Alihan Polat from the Environmental Simulation Center and Demen Orhun from Merdiven, who will be taking their place and take part in this discussion. Today we will discuss tonight's subject from a variety of perspectives, as the title suggests, from both the Turkish and U.S. side, assessing the situation and providing solutions in regards to procedure. But before we get started, I would like to take this opportunity to tell you a bit about the Turkish Policy Center, or TPC. We are a nonprofit organization, a 501c3, completely run by volunteers, completely independent from any political party, government, or political organization. We are entering our 4th year now, and we are completely funded by independent donors, and our members, some of whom are in the audience today. Our goal is to work towards a secular Turkey that is more democratic, tolerant, inclusive, and strong. You can find out more about us online at www.turkishpolicycenter.org. We are also on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, basically everywhere online. We have other interesting events coming up, and you can look those up online or sign up for our email list outside and receive regular updates. Besides such perennial issues like the economy, the Turkey-EU accession, trade, security, upcoming elections, etc., we pride ourselves on also covering other soft issues that are just as important, such as human rights, women's rights, urban development, press freedom, etc. Our next panel discussion should be in the spring and will be regarding justice and law in Turkey. Please stay tuned. This event here would not have been possible without our sponsors, and I would like to take a moment to thank them. I thank the Ataturk Society of America, of which the founders, Mr. Hüdayi Yavalar and Mrs. Mirat Yavalar, are here for their continued support, and I congratulate them on their latest achievement, a beautiful bronze statue of Ataturk at Sheridan Circle. I thank the United Minds for Progress, a 501c3. The purposes of UMFP are to promote equal opportunities in education, information access, and use of renewable energy around the world by studying related technologies and disseminating information in these fields. I also thank American AV for providing all of our audiovisual equipment tonight. Since 1972, American AV has had the opportunity to help design, manage, and produce memorable events across the nation through unique audiovisual designs. And last but not least, I thank Güç Birliği for their support. Güç Birliği is a Washington, D.C.-based educational nonprofit that was established following the Gezi protests and is comprised of volunteers who believe in democracy, transparency, and an efficient and sustainable market economy. We look forward to working with all our sponsors in the future, and we thank them again. Before we start, I would also like to thank our members of TPC for their continued support. Without your financial support, personal sacrifices, and volunteer work, none of this would be possible. I would like to single out a few people, though. I thank Ayşe Cohen, who will be moderating today's panel, for her tireless work to put together today's discussion. I thank Erdem Değirmencioğlu for his input and assistance, and his company Sinorama for providing the posters. Finally, I thank Aslı Köksal and Fatima Argun for their invaluable advice and assistance in making this all happen. Later this week, you may tune into Turkish Policy Center's YouTube channel and webpage, where you can learn more about our distinguished panel and access the video of tonight's session. To help you continue the discussion online, we will also be uploading video extras from noted experts such as Dr. Mariela ALFONZO from State of Place and from Erhan ÖNCÜ, a prominent member of the Chambers of City Planners and Architects. Now let's get to the subject itself. I'm going to give a brief introduction of this subject, and after that we'll move on to the moderator and introduction. Let me just point out that this panel has two aspects. What is happening in Turkey in regards to urban development and construction, in regards to the political and corruption aspect of recent developments. We're going to assess that. And secondly, but just as important, if not more important, is defining the solution to problems. So if the system in Turkey is, if there's corruption, if it excludes public input and does not have democratic checks and balances, then what should the process actually look like? So these are, I think, to a certain degree, universal problems, and we have experts here who will explore these issues. Now, I think the reason why we have such good participation here today is the ongoing corruption investigations in Turkey, which started a few weeks ago. There is a lot written out there about the subject, but I found a very good recent article in Forbes written by Melik Kaylan, which summarized the situation perfectly. I tried to summarize it better, but I couldn't, so I'll read an excerpt. The corruption probe against Erdogan loyalists focuses essentially on two areas of alleged misconduct: the machinations of a state bank doing business with Iran and separately widespread graft in the construction sector. The first has already received plenty of scrutiny worldwide as it concerns potential sanctions busting. Let us look at the second in a simple and digestible way. It is worth remembering that Erdogan's mystique first showed cracks over his virulent reaction to the Gezi Park protests. That too was about huge building projects. There is something about construction that seems to matter a lot to Erdogan's grip on power. The fact is, no other industry does the same job that banks do of dispersing money throughout the economy while avoiding the banking sector's transparent accounting practices. In other words, construction spreads employment and largesse among huge slices of the poorer voting population. As the Chinese have found out, it can even keep a non-voting population quiescent. Construction also serves as a traffic vehicle for laundering money that enters the economy in large amounts from political patrons in the Gulf states. Erdogan's Islamic backers in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf keep Turkey's current account deficit from going south with large infusions of funds, and there's nothing that they understand more than high-rise towers. As socio-Olympic expenditures have demonstrated in Russia, construction provides highly efficient conduits for rewarding cronies. And as Western economies also found out, there's no bubble more easily inflatable than a housing bubble. You can borrow for it, and you can borrow against it. You can sell securities through it. You can have a pretend economy. Why else does construction matter? Here's something the Saudis first pioneered in the Islamic world by building all over Mecca's historic sites. You can alter the national memory and rejig social groupings through construction. In Turkey's case, this has involved pushing huge highways through secular pro-Western middle class and affluent areas, thereby dispersing communities that vote for the other side. This is happening through the campus of Orta Doğu Technical University, the country's top academy of science in the capital of Ankara. That'll teach them to espouse Darwinism and other empirical heresies. Construction also allows you to create loyalist communities. Turkey's National Housing Fund subsidizes residential complexes that issue studio apartments or one-bedrooms so as to prevent singles' lifestyles. Mussolini would have understood. Cities populated by traditional villages full of propagating families shape urban values rather than the other way around. Well, I know that was a bit of a long quote, but I thought it summarizes things quite well. So some of the typical examples where the Turkish government's urban development policies have been criticized was the redevelopment of Gezi Park in Istanbul, the placement of a highway through the forests of Middle Eastern Technical University in Ankara, and the so-called mega projects, or crazy projects, including an airport that costs 22.1 billion euros and which will demolish the size of a forest the size of Manhattan, a third Bosphorus bridge, and the largest mosque in the world, among others. Another glitch in the matrix. No. The discontent was not only due to the loss of a central park in Istanbul or loss of a pristine forest, both of which are disastrous in their own way, but also the politics associated with real estate development and the award of construction contracts worth billions of dollars. Now, all this is symptomatic of deeper problems, and you're here to listen to me, not me, but the panel. So without further ado, let's explore these issues more deeply, the symptoms, the problems, and the solutions. So I present to you Ayşe Cohen, TPC Urban Development Fellow, who shall be moderating this panel.
Hello, merhaba. My name is Ayşe Rüya Cohen, and I am the Urban Development Fellow of the Turkish Policy Center. It is my honor to be your moderator for this evening. Tonight, our distinguished panelists will give their insights. Questions that we have come up for tonight's discussion include: Turkey has experienced massive protests since May of last year. Right now, it is embroiled in the largest controversy over a corruption scandal in its history. One of the unifying factors in this controversy are the construction projects and urban development issues that are the core of these developments. What initiatives can be taken to increase public participation, transparency, and checks and balances in relation to the government's roles in these fields? 2, what are some of the best and worst practices that the city of Washington, D.C. can share with the Turkish cities and vice versa, using the sister city relationship signed between Washington, D.C. and Ankara, Turkey in 2011? 3, how have urban development projects that you have worked on impacted urban sprawl, gentrification, and natural resources? Have communities been displaced by these new developments? 4, how can marginalized and disenfranchised groups be included into the urban planning process? How can we design smart infrastructure so development doesn't only occur physically and economically, but also socially and culturally as well? Thank you for lending your time, expertise, and energy to make this international discussion possible. We are honored to have you at the National Academy of Sciences 93rd Annual Transportation Research Board Conference and to begin this important and timely dialogue. Without further ado, we will start with Mr. Alihan Polat. Mr. Alihan Polat is a senior research associate at the Environmental Simulation Center in New York. He works on environmental impact studies, ULARP documents, and shadow and daylighting analysis. He also teaches at SUNY New York in fields such as GIS, fundamentals in visualization, environmental science, and digital mapping and geography. To his right, we have Mr. Roger Millar, who is the we have Mr. Demen Orhun, who is representing the organization, the Merdiven Project. Mr. Orhun is a principal member of the technical staff at the Oracle Corporation. He has extensive experience in software development, working for such companies as PassLogix, INC, Siemens Medical Solutions, American Home Mortgage Development Corporation, and Regions Financial Corporation. Third, we have Mr. Roger Millar, the Vice President and Director of the Smart Growth America's Leadership Institute and the Director of the National Complete Streets Coalition, also with Smart Growth America, based here in Washington, D.C. Mr. Millar has had leadership positions in public and private sectors, notably as the Planning Director of Missoula, Montana's Planning Office and Grants Office. Also, he has taken a considerable leadership role in the development of the national models of Portland, Oregon's Pearl District, and the Portland streetcar. Lastly, he has managed and participated in rural projects signature project, for rural resort and gateway communities in the American West. Fourth, we have Mr. Scott Kratz, the director of the 11th Street Park project. He is the outgoing vice president for education at the National Building Museum here in Washington, D.C. Previously, he has been associate director for the study of the American West at the Autry National Center in Los Angeles, California, where he supervised a team of programs including theater, film, music, festivals, family programs, lecture series, and academic symposia. Last but not least, we have Ms. Anita Hairston, the associate director at PolicyLink, where she advocates programs which promote equitable and fair infrastructure investments with a particular focus on surface transportation. Anita has spent 6 years in the Washington, D.C. planning office, beginning as a community planner and ultimately ending as their chief of staff, where she participated in citywide and neighborhood plans, media activities, legislative initiatives, and major projects there. Previously, she was also a planning consultant for the city of San Francisco's Regional Smart Growth Plan. Thank you for your lending your time and energy, and without further ado, I'd like to begin with Mr. Alihan Polat's remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Aisha, and thank you everyone for being with us tonight. And it's a great pleasure to be here tonight, so thank you for inviting me. As Aisha explained, I work in New York City for the last 10 years, and I'm an urban planner by job definition and educated in that field. And I have, I shouldn't say a brief, but I have a history of working within projects in Turkey as well. For a cast of 5 to 6 years, we actually created an advisory committee to shape up the urban planning and regeneration efforts in Istanbul. This was years ago, and with respect to the local government in Istanbul, I think it was 8 years ago when it all started, or 7 years ago. We established and created a team from all over the world about explaining different urban generation and urban planning efforts and what could be done and what shouldn't be done about Istanbul. So we were asked to present a report and findings about what are the good examples from the world that Istanbul can adapt, and what shouldn't Istanbul adapt, so that we won't create, I shouldn't maybe calling it, but we won't be a massive planning problem as it exists today. And the key factors of the project that we worked, and we were actually invited by a local government agency that works under the metropolitan municipality. And the first thing we find out is that the municipal bodies, I mean, it happens in the United States as well from time to time, but there's very poor level of coordination in between the municipal bodies, and there are actually different planning agendas and efforts in means of both policy planning and physical planning as well. So different departments tend to take the development into different shapes. And that's how all it started. And we had this roller coaster adventure of 5-6 years, and then the whole project turned into a more political agenda, and we handed in everything to the Turkish local government, which they took over from there. And then I shouldn't maybe say totally a different position, but with a different angle. Their approach was different than what we set up as a guideline. We were more keen about user-participated design, and also some smart design agenda that we could have metrics to measure how do we grow, where do we grow, and then if the growth patterns are right, so we should keep doing it, or we monitor them and find out what doesn't work and highlight them and change the scope. But actually it didn't really go into that direction. So I don't want to speak too much. Maybe this is a little enough for the remarks, and then more of it could be Q&A based, but basically I have a good 6 years of experience with working with Turkish government, and I do have almost 10 plus years of working with the American government on similar scale projects, and I know the difference is too much very different actually. And as far as I can say, from what I know, even with the current situation in Turkey, unfortunately, the environmental design and the protection issue of environment is totally different than in many of the developed countries. I mean, Turkey is a developing country, so it's understandable that the environmental factors are neglected more than the developed countries, but at the same time, because there's no checks and balances and there's very little not-for-profits or civic groups that are in action, I mean, they would be allowed to act within the active planning process. It's very hard to fight for an opposing idea, or it's even very hard to sit in discussion with local governments or the federal government and put something else to the table. It's very hard to fight for it, and the mechanisms or the channels that are supposed to keep that open doesn't really exist, unfortunately, in Turkey, or they barely exist, and it's very hard to follow them and turn them into a success story. So again, like I said, I can answer or talk more about it in Q&A probably.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. On to our next speaker, Mr. Damon Orhan. Denem, excuse me.
Hi everybody, I'm here to talk about our project. Basically it's a virtual town hall. It's a citizens participation platform where the citizens can engage with their local municipality over an application or over the web. One of the questions asked was what initiatives can we take to allow citizens to interact more with their local authorities. Well, Gezi was a upheaval unmatched in Turkish history, and what happened was the citizens were protesting versus the government, who wanted to take a park and make it into a shopping mall. There was no platform where the citizens could voice their concerns, and then the government could take these concerns into consideration. So what we want to do here is provide an application for mobile development, where the citizens can, through photographs, hashtags, and short text, submit their requests to their local municipality. Merdivan, the word merdivan is a staircase, and which was part of the demonstrations performed during the Gezi. The citizens were painting the staircases into different colors as a sign of protest versus the urban renewal. The word divan is an assembly in Ottoman times. So we put those two together, and it's basically our application. In Gezi, the message was lost. People were demonstrating, but there was no coherent message given to the authorities. Whereas if there was a pool of issues or demands in an internet environment, the authorities could have evaluated these concerns much better. Social media is a great tool for the citizens to organize and submit their requests to their authorities. Our application will be a map layout where all the requests are added and submitted to the authorities. This way, performance can be evaluated in a central location, central internet pool, and it will be more transparent for everybody involved. Our application is going to be somewhat of a game. It's going to reward all the users through badges, and they will be able to see their requests completed and tracked on this map system that we're thinking of implementing. This platform will provide a democratic and transparent system where all the requests can be tracked and solved by the municipality. And this will create a feedback loop where the citizens and the municipality will know how progress is being made. We can, if you have any questions to talk more in detail, I can provide those too. This is basically our application.
Thank you very much. On to our third speaker, Mr. Roger Millar from Smart Growth America.
Well, good evening, and thank you for inviting me this evening. What I wanted to do with my opening remarks was just kind of set the frame for what we call smart growth here in the United States, and give you a sense of how we message it, and perhaps it'll be useful to you in your discussions with what's going on in your country. I'm the Vice President of Smart Growth America. Smart Growth America is a national not-for-profit organization. We surprisingly advocate for smart growth. We do advocacy, we do policy development, we do research, and we do technical assistance around the country. Smart growth to us, it's called smart growth, it's called sustainability, it's called livability, it's been called lots of things over time. But smart growth to us is strategies for urban communities and suburban communities and rural communities. So the community size doesn't really matter, but strategies for urban, rural, and suburban communities that provide people with housing and transportation choices near jobs and shopping and schools. And smart growth strategies are designed to support thriving local economies and protect the environment. That's our definition of it. I talk to communities around the country about the values behind smart growth. I talk about the trends that we see that we're worried about, and the framing that we use. One of the things when you start talking about sustainability in the United States, you immediately get into a partisan place, because there are people across the political spectrum have very different ideas of sustainability, and the notion that it's a radical idea or a liberal idea or what have you. I look at my history, my family's history, and I can frame sustainability in American history. I can frame sustainability in religious tenets. I can frame sustainability in the things I did as a youth growing up. I was a Boy Scout, and I was an Eagle Scout, and my two brothers are Eagle Scouts as well. And one of the things we learned in Boy Scouts, which is not a radical organization, was that citizenship and environmental stewardship are not mutually exclusive. They're parts of a whole. And so we talk about that. I'm a civil engineer by training, and the American Society of Civil Engineers that I'm a fellow of has a canon of ethics. And in that canon of ethics, it is ethical for an engineer to be sustainable, and to practice in a way that is not sustainable is unethical. So again, another radical organization, the Civil Engineers of the United States. So, you know, people try to paint sustainability as some worldwide agenda to usurp authority, and I really look at it as another version of the American dream, the latest iteration, the latest definition. It really is an expression of our values as a national community over hundreds of years, and I think that thought maybe can be translated to other nations. In terms of trends that we're following in the United States, and you may have different trends in Turkey, but things that we're following that we're concerned about the aging of America. I live in Montana. I don't live in Washington, D.C. Montana is a state of old people. You know, over the next 25 or 30 years, we're going to have roughly the same number of school children that we have today, roughly the same number of young adults, the same number of middle-aged people, but our 65 and older population is doubling. All of the growth, all of the net growth in population in Montana is going to be senior citizens. And we're seeing that around the country because we're living longer, we're making different lifestyle choices. So as we age as a community, and you live in a rural place like I do, how do you maintain your independence and your dignity when you have to hang up your car keys for the last time? That's something we're very concerned about. Another thing we're concerned about is the changing household composition. I ask my audiences if they know does anybody know who Ozzie and Harriet were? Couple people. Ozzie and Harriet was a TV show in the United States in the late 50s, early 60s. They're not around anymore, but we continue to design our communities for them. It's unfortunate. Back in 1960, half of American households had children in them. Today, that number is less than a third, and it's dropping. There are actually more people in Missoula, Montana, where I was the planning director. There are more people there in households living alone than there are in households with children in them. And what that's leading to in our country is a glut of large lot, single-family homes, of McMansions. The only choice we've given people in housing since World War II is it's become the 4-bedroom, 3-bath garage or house with the 3-car garage on 5 acres of land. That doesn't apply to most of the households that are going to be added to our country over the next 25 years. When you think of singles, when you think of young adults, they're looking for an urban experience, they're looking for a mixed-use community. And so we have this glut of large houses, and we have this need for new stuff, and we have a development market that continues to build for a world that doesn't exist anymore. And so one of the things that we try to do is just point out the fact that your market, 85% of the housing needed in the United States in the next 25 years is going to be for singles and people living in households without children. Different market than where the industry has been in the past. Another thing we worry about in our country is the obesity epidemic. Over a third of Americans are obese, and the number is rising. 35% of our children are obese, and it's because, in part, how we've built our communities. The Centers for Disease Control has recognized that how we build community affects our health. And that obesity epidemic is having health consequences for us as individuals, and it's having fiscal consequences for our country. So what we're looking at is, can we build communities in a way that we have parks and open space and transit and walkable experiences so that people remain healthy, because it's a good idea to be healthy, and because it costs us less as a society if we're a healthy society. And the other thing we're looking at is the cost of housing. With the bursting of the housing bubble, the market kind of fell apart. But still, there are an awful lot of families in the United States who can't afford to house themselves with dignity. So we worry. I joke in my presentations about my little boy. He's 11 years old. Is he going to grow up to be old, fat, broken, alone? I hope not. And I'm involved in this movement in part to keep that from happening. So the smart growth movement is about the environment, it's about society and equity and those issues, and it's about economics. And we've spent an awful lot of time in the smart growth movement talking about social issues and talking about the environmental issues, but we really weren't touching the economic issues. And when we had our recent economic downturn in the United States, there were a lot of people that said, Roger, I'd love to talk about smart growth. Let's get the economy back in order, and then we'll talk about that nice stuff. And what we have come to realize, and what we're showing people, and what people are realizing, for themselves, is that smart growth isn't just a good idea; it's a good deal. We framed all of our stuff in economics. We've gone to people who build roads and said, you're building roads to create jobs. Is that the purpose of building the road? The building the road is to create jobs. Do you know for dollars spent, you'll create more jobs building transit systems than you will building roads? Oh, really? Yes. 30% more jobs per dollar spent. People are beginning to think about that. We've questioned why we're adding to our road system when we're not maintaining what we have. And we've encouraged states and cities around the country to fix what they have first before they add to the system, because that makes economic sense. We've encouraged people to build transit. We've encouraged people to enter into public-private partnerships so that money goes farther, and don't just give people money. One of the things that we did, again, I'm an engineer, and I've been involved in transportation in cities around the country, around the world. We would build something, and then we'd go to the community and say, "Isn't it wonderful?" And we would get beat up, and we wondered why. Rather than just building it and seeing what happens, what we're recommending is that communities enter into contingent relationships. If we spend this money, how is it going to benefit us? And understand that and look at the return on investment in expenditures. And the last thing we're talking about is just reframing the selection process for the projects that we do. It's been opaque, it's been in the hands of agencies and professionals who in the past have paid lip service to public involvement. And because of things like the National Environmental Policy Act and the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, and citizens being understandably outraged about what was happening, now we have the opportunity to select our projects and decide how we're going to invest our funds in ways that provide economic benefits and social benefits and environmental benefits. So that's what we're about, and I'll pass it on to the next people.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. Onwards, we have Mr. Scott Kratz, the new director for the 11th Street Bridge Park Project.
Great. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for the invitation. So this is a story about building a new civic space here in the nation's capital in Washington, D.C., and having that civic space be designed every step of the way by the community. And I think that's the reason why I've been asked to speak at this panel this evening. Cities are increasingly being defined by their civic spaces. Increasingly, cities are looking at how they can take aged-out infrastructure, and instead of just ripping it all down, how can you transform that infrastructure into new civic spaces, into spaces that can create new jobs, social capital, and healthy places. Probably the best example of this is the High Line in New York City. Who's been to the High Line in New York? A couple of people, right? A few people. It's a magical place, right? The 4 million visitors a year, the $2 billion in economic development, all built on what was once considered an aging and dangerous, the elevated train track that has become one of the top 10 tourist destinations in New York City. That's happening around the United States. The walkway over the Hudson, an old train trestle that crossed over the Hudson River has been transformed into a new hiking trail that gets 750,000 visitors a year in Poughkeepsie. This is happening in Chicago, the Bloomingdale Trail, a similar elevated train track in Chicago that later this year will be opening up an over 2-mile green space with the express purpose to link otherwise divided communities. I could go on and go on about some of those examples, but I'd like to get to the example that we're working on right here in Washington, D.C. So in short, the 11th Street Bridge Park is taking an aged-out freeway that crosses over the Anacostia River. So first, a little geography. We have 2 rivers here in Washington, D.C., the Potomac that everybody knows. Then we have a second river called the Anacostia River, sometimes called the Forgotten River, an old freeway that connects Capitol Hill community with historic Anacostia, both sides of the river, has aged out. And working in collaboration with the DC Office of Planning and a local nonprofit appropriately named Building Bridges Across the River, at the Arc, amazing nonprofit, is working to transform part of that old infrastructure into a new civic space. We have 4 key goals for the project. First, many of the items that you just mentioned on public health is a key goal. Epidemiologists tell us that place where we live and where we work is the single greatest determinant of public health. If you give me your zip code in Washington, D.C., we can often tell you what your life expectancy is. And having a safe place for active recreation is absolutely essential to a healthy population. The Ward 8 and Ward 7, which are the 2 communities on one side of this bridge, have terrible health disparities. The highest rates of obesity in the city, 41.9% adult obesity rate, highest rates of hypertension, lowest access of fresh fruits and vegetables, the highest rates of hypertension, the list goes on and on. The second goal is environmental education. We have done an amazing job in this country of putting as many barriers as we can between humans and the waterfront. In Washington, D.C., I think we get a special prize for highways and railroad tracks and a legacy of industrial pollution and industrial use. And we're slowly peeling those layers away. But what we're trying to do to get people to really care about the river, you first need to get them down to the river. And that's a key goal for this 11th Street Bridge Park. And the last two goals are closely linked. The river's also been a dividing line for generations in this city. So how can this new civic space that we're creating be a safe place for both sides of the river to gather, to really help stitch together an otherwise divided city that has been that way for generations. And lastly, if we're really successful and this becomes a destination with visitors and people traveling there and walking there and biking there, how can this become an anchor for economic development, supporting small businesses on both sides? So how do we get there? We spent the first 6 months working on this project of making sure that all of the government officials that needed to be connected with this project were on board. This is Washington, D.C., so there's a lot of chefs in that kitchen. There's National Park Service, there's the Historic Navy Yard is adjacent to this project. There's the U.S. Commission of Fine Arts, the National Capital Planning Commission, DDOT, the list goes on and on. But everyone said, yeah, this is a really amazing opportunity. Let's look at transforming this old freeway bridge into a new civic space. And then we immediately went to engaging the public. We went out, and this was really where I got engaged about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, of asking 2 questions to the public. One, is this something that the public wants? Because if the public doesn't want this, then at the time I was volunteering on this project, and I probably have better uses to spend my time. But we heard an enthusiastic yes from both sides of the river. And 2, if that first answer was yes, what is it that the public wants on top of this bridge park? I might think that a rock wall down to the water is the coolest thing ever. The public might want performance space, environmental education center, urban agriculture, kayak and canoe launches on the river below, public art that tells the rich history of the region, all of which are items that we've heard from the public. The important thing is to go early and often to members of the community, particularly east of the river. This has been a community that's been disenfranchised. They've been and there's a huge trust deficit, and understandably so. They've been promised a lot of things, and those promises often get value engineered out of the project. People come in, they make great promises in the public meeting that they're there once, and then they disappear and nobody hears them again, and all those promises, they never materialize. So to date, we've had 170 community meetings with church leaders, with the community groups, with a local government that we call ANC commissioners. These are elected but volunteer positions. With business leaders, soliciting their feedback, by going early and often to these community meetings, even when we're not on the agenda, that builds trust. And I think that's what we're going to get into in some of this discussion today. And what is trust but shared experiences over time, right? And I think the reason why people now trust the project is because they're hearing their ideas, their concepts be engaged, be included as part of this bridge park. So where are we today? And then I'll wrap up. We launched a $1 million per-capita campaign over the summer. We've raised more than half of that, which is great, $545,000 to be precise, which is enough to launch a nationwide design competition, which we're launching in mid-March. And it's key that every step of the way that we're continuing to engage that community. This isn't over. This really needs to be owned by the community. So we're creating a design oversight committee that have representatives from every ward in Washington, D.C. to help review the design brief, to review each phase of the competition and make sure that they continue to have ownership and buy-in of this project moving forward. The key is that this is not this is sort of changing, I think, sort of how perhaps we did things 50, 60 years ago, sort of a top-down approach and really bottom-up to support the environmental health, the economic health, and the physical health of Washington, D.C. So with that, I'll wrap up.
Thank you very much. And on to our last but not least speaker, Ms. Nita Harrison from Policy Link.
Hi, good afternoon and evening to everyone. I'm really fascinated by this discussion, and I'm also struck that there's actually no better day to really talk about the need for fairness, justice, and inclusion, as it is the birthday of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. I'm just struck that it's really appropriate to really talk about how do we make sure we're including everyone, both in process, but then also in the benefits that come from development, and I think that's come across in all of the presentations. So I just want to add a few examples from Washington, D.C., and then also from other parts of the country as well. Really, as an organization, Policy Link really seeks to advance equity, fair and just inclusion in a society where all can participate and prosper, regardless of your age, your income, your race, your physical ability, your country of origin. All of those things are really important to us. And so when we think about how do we achieve that vision, we think about it from we ask ourselves three different questions, and I invite you to join in thinking about these different questions as well. We think about who pays, who benefits, and who decides. We think that that's really critical in as you're thinking about development in a city or lack thereof. It's really important to think about those. In terms of who pays, in terms of the costs that go into a new development, whether it's or infrastructure that you have in your community, whether it's how much you pay to get on a bus or a train or a subway, whether it's other types of payments that you make in terms of the quality of your environment. Are you suffering poor air quality from polluting vehicles, that kind of thing? Are you suffering you don't have access to the river because the river is of a poor quality? Those kinds of things come into who pays. And then when you think about who benefits, are the types of things that people need to live a good life, access to markets and grocery stores, access to jobs, access to quality, affordable housing. Is that a benefit that you have in your community? Are all people benefiting equally? And then when we think about who decides, I'm struck that we're here at the Transportation Research Board, and with all due respect to all of us, transportation is really too important to leave to transportation engineers and planners. I'm an urban planner by training, so I say that as a full self-critique. It's really important to think about that. And one practical example comes from Minnesota, here in the United States, and a community or actually it was a regional project in Minnesota looking at how to install a new transportation line, a light rail line that would connect Minneapolis and St. Paul to cities that did not have the transit connections there. The planned route was laid out, and it actually ended up planning to bypass some of the parts of the region that had the highest transportation ridership, also had the highest number of people who were lower income, communities of color, people who really needed a transit option, needed to have access to this light rail. The original plans that were put together by transportation planners who had in mind getting people from one place to another very quickly overlooked an entire section of people. And it happened that it was the same section of town that had actually been bifurcated by highways 30 years earlier. So you talk about a double blow to a community, and really a community that had already been bisected was going to be excluded here in the 21st century after suffering a 20th century blow. So all the more important to think about who decides and who benefits. And so I would say just a couple of things related to, kind of thinking about these questions. I would say that it's really important to consider what are some of the goals that a place has, and is everyone really able to achieve those goals. So if we think about Washington, D.C., and we think about sets of goals that are here around creating communities where everyone has ability to walk or bicycle or take a bus or a subway to get to where they need to go in the region. In some ways, if you look at some of the data, we're doing fairly well with our goals. So there's a goal by 2032 to be able to have 50% of all of the trips that are taken be by a transit ride. And so right now, the data tells us that about 38% of folks in DC, that's the route that they take to get to work. I would say it's important to really drill down a little bit more because there are differences depending on where you live. This was, I think, something that Scott was highlighting as well. If you live in the center of the city, you have access to 5 out of 10 jobs in the region that you can get to in a 90-minute transit trip. If you live in Anacostia, where Scott was talking about, anywhere east of the river, you only have access to 3 out of 10 of those jobs in the region. So you are at a disadvantage depending on where you live. So it's not just a health issue; it's an actual, it's a wealth issue. Are you able to access jobs and provide for your family? So I think it's important to think about that aspect of who pays. I think the last thing I'll say, because I'm really interested in getting into the conversation, is thinking about what are ways to look at community engagement as a way of promoting stewardship. Stewardship over your community, stewardship over your region, feeling like you have a place not just in the process, and it's important to have a place in the process. I'm fascinated by the app that was talked about earlier, but you have a place in the eventual community that's created with the new amenities and that kind of thing. And so one of the barriers to that is actual knowledge of how all these different processes work. The alphabet soup of who decides on this part of the project, who is the board that you're appealing to here, and how do you understand that? That's not something that we get in civics class, or some kind of classroom setting that you might get in your elementary or secondary education. So a nonprofit based in the San Francisco Bay Area thought this was really important to set this out and to put together essentially like an institute. Such that folks would be able to learn about this. And they called this the Boards and Commissions Leadership Institute. And in particular, they noted that when they looked around the room in public settings, they saw that there wasn't a whole lot of racial or economic diversity in who was coming to meetings to talk about these issues, even though many people of color and lower income people were being disproportionately affected. And so they decided they'd create this institute and they would educate folks and help people to be able to understand what are the processes, what influence do you have over them at what particular time. And then they took the step of placing people on the different governing bodies that make the decisions. And so they're several years into this, and they've been able to do a 100% placement rate for folks on boards and commissions. It remains to be seen how they're able to shape the process. I think that's something that they're still learning about, but I encourage you to check out Urban Habitat. It's their Boards and Commissions Leadership Institute. And that is one example of kind of this more inclusive community engagement model that we are very much a fan of. And it's described, I'll just do a quick book plug, it's described in All in Nation and America That Works for All, and I have some bookmarks that I will pass around to folks, and you can download it from the website that's listed on the back here. I'll stop there.
All right, thank you very much to our wonderful speakers. Just to wrap up, we've heard how fairness, justice, and inclusion can be included in the planning process in communities that have been bifurcated and excluded at times by infrastructure from Ms. Anita Harrison from Policy Link. We've also heard how the adaptive reuse of public spaces and infrastructure can be used to link communities long divided and build trust across the river of Anacostia from Mr. Scott Kratz of the 11th Street Bridge Park Project. And we've also heard from Mr. Roger Millar from Smart Growth, America, about communicating the social, environmental, and economic messages of smart growth to cities across the nation. Also, we have heard from Mr. Demen Orhan on how to harness the power of emerging technologies to translate the messages of movements such as Gezi Park, which had unprecedented momentum and energy in Turkey. Lastly, we have also heard from Mr. Alihan Polat, who has a unique perspective working in both the US and Turkey on the politicization of the urban planning process. I now thank the speakers for their energy, time, and efforts in bringing to us a year's worth of experience in the urban planning profession. And I would like to open it up to the floor to all of you to ask questions. Okay, first in the back. Please state your name, affiliation, and question. Thanks.
My name is Stuart Chen. I'm a civil engineering professor at the State University of New York at Buffalo. State University of New York, by the way, has some joint programs with Turkish University. I am biracial, somewhat bicultural. I spent a year in Turkey 8 years ago, hosted by İnşaat Mühendisliği, Civil Engineering Department at Istanbul Teknik Üniversitesi. So while I was there, and I don't disagree with any subjects that have been raised, but there's another area that I want to ask about. While I was there, the first Turkish welding code governing the design and construction of welded structures, I'm a structural engineer, was just then finally actually being finalized. While I was there, it became evident to me, if I understand correctly, that there was no system for licensing professional engineers, or PEs. A professional engineer is to the practice of civil engineering what an RN is to nursing, an MD is to medical doctors. It provides a certain accountability. It was mentioned there was no checks and balances. That was a phrase I heard Mr. Polat mention. I'm setting the stage for my question, okay? 1999 earthquakes revealed that the dominant design, build, construction practices had inadequate checks and balances on the integrity of the design being carried through into construction. Now, I'm not trying to embarrass anyone, but if I would put it in a slogan, I would say, no nonprofits would give us the codes, no PE system, no regulatory infrastructure for associated certifications. No wonder there's such corruption involved in construction projects. Think now, you would not want to impose the US system of certifications and licensure on another country. A country, I believe, needs to develop its own contextualized system for such certifications and licensures. For every stage in the construction process, it's over-regulated here, but there are such things that provide some of the checks and balances. My question is, what has been done or is being done to create a contextualized system for licensures and certifications, a system which includes legal protections for such professionals behaving ethically? Penalties for unethics, sure. I'll be glad to repeat the question.
Okay. Would anyone like to answer the question about ethics and contextualized certification?
Well, I can jump in a little bit. The short answer to your question is none. I mean, I think we all know it. It's the pink elephant in the room. And there are many reasons. One of the reasons is the fact that our not-for-profits and our, unfortunately, like let's say, unfortunately they were not here with us today due to the accident, but they would have done a better remark on this. But usually with the case in Turkey, how it works is the government and the not-for-profit agencies and other civic groups that involves like, creating these ethic codes and writing maybe laws and regulations or publishing reports about certain things, so the government looks at their regulations, or if they see anything that's not regulated, creates a new regulation, doesn't really exist in Turkey. And one of the reasons is, unfortunately, governments do see these as road bumps. Because the way things work in Turkey, to be very frank about it, is that if none of these exist, development could be done way faster. And that's correct. The certification and the environmental reports, everything that we do in here does take time. If you want to do a major I'm not really sure how it works in District of Columbia or Virginia, but I'm assuming it's very similar. In New York, in state of New York, if you want to do a project that's larger than a certain threshold, or that would involve changing the code or giving a variance, there's at least like a year or 2 years of time in front of you. You need to plan ahead, do all the analysis, submit everything, open the project to public participation, discussions. And you're right, some of this works, some of this doesn't work even in the US as well, but at least there is a code and there's a calendar of events that you know. So if you're at point A when you start the project, and then you're at point B when you start constructing the project. Now, usually the way I experienced in Turkey, and I actually was involved in the earthquake, I was in one of the towns, so I literally lived it, and worked as a junior landscape architect by then to create permanent housing for the earthquake victims. And the way it works is that you start the project, you get certification within a week, and then you start construction the next week. And then everything comes right after it. So you do things on the way. Again, it's not a great thing. It does certain things quickly, yes. Turks do love it, because it's practical, it's easy to do, and the way it works is economically, because it's a developing country, usually the funds are available for the actual construction, but not the planning process, or not the environmental analysis. So we're speaking about all these sophisticated things about public participation, the environmental reviews, this and that. It's not that nobody in Turkey knows about these issues. Actually, a lot of people do know about these issues, and a lot of people would complain about these issues. But the problem is, including government, nobody wants to spend time, energy, and most importantly, finances on these things, because these things do cost money. And at the end of the day, probably the amount spent is well worth about what is being researched or what is being implemented, but it's a long-term investment, and looks like our country does like the short-term investment better than the long-term investment.
I would just suggest that if the answer continues to be no moving forward, then this problem will not be solved.
Exactly.
Someone else should have a turn to ask the question.
Okay, next question, and please state your question in the form of a question. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Bushhawk, and I'm a graduate student at George Mason University in Cultural Studies. My question is also for Erhan Polat, actually, and this relates to both what the gentleman in the back said and what Anita Hairston has been talking about on who pays and who benefits and who decides, and how do we know how these things happen. So I believe you worked during a timeline when the changes to the legislations in Turkey to the urban renewal policies have happened. So I'm talking about precisely the usage of time-worn, historical, cultural, real property with restoration and protection law. So I was wondering if you would want to speak to that in specific and what those changes have done for the city as you were working with the municipality.
Well, I'll answer it very shortly so that our other panelists could add back to it. But I'm assuming it's the fact in U.S. as well, and I will turn to the other panelists. It's very hard it's very hard to sit on the table with different agencies from time to time due to political reasons, different scopes and different project layouts. But it's almost impossible in Turkey to sit with more government agencies because usually the case is every agency has their own political agenda and nobody wants to bend. So what happens is that if there's no rules or nothing written about that subject, if there's a gap in there, all the agencies would want to run the code by their usage. And it's not usually a discussion, but it's about who has the jurisdiction over who. So that's how things are done, unfortunately. And regarding the large projects, as our current government who runs the office likes to do them, the way they work is it's a top-down planning effort. So nothing really done in, I can even assure you when I worked with the Istanbul municipality, a lot of the municipal bodies, like basically including the mayor's office, has very little say in certain things. Most of the things are run by the central government and the projects are initiated by them because mostly funding is coming from them. Although the municipalities have access to a large chunk of money and overseas credit and international finances, still doing a large infrastructure or large planning project in Turkey does really has to do with government funds. So that's the reason when we spoke about checks and balances, there's not really any civic authority who can get into the process, be on board and say, okay, how about if we look at things in a different way, or how about if we look at it from a different angle? It's very hard. But again, I mean, if any of our panelists want to add how it works in the U.S.
I'll just add one point. I mean, I think that there are similar challenges, and having worked in local government, I encountered those. And I think there are a couple of things that our central government, the federal government, has done and can do to bring people to a table. One can be a stick, one can be a carrot. So I'll start with the stick first. One of the things they can do is enact different regulation that requires people to work together. So in Washington, D.C., one of the things that happened within the city is that there was a threat that our zoning code would have to be changed in order to address floodplain issues coming from the Anacostia and the Potomac rivers, and that it would create kind of a devastating effect across the downtown such that all of your first floors of the downtown could not be inhabitable unless there was the construction of a flood wall. And in order to, and the flood wall had to go on the National Mall, which is America's backyard. And because of that, quote unquote, America's backyard, there are so many constituencies that care about it that everybody had to come to the table to figure out how we were going to build a flood wall on America's backyard. Otherwise, the entire downtown, you know, your first floor, you would be looking through to other buildings and canyons, and it wouldn't have the vibrancy and interest. So that's the stick. The carrot, the housing department, the federal housing department, found some resource, or not found some resources, allocated some resources with the caveat that it couldn't just go to local housing departments. Housing departments had to bring in health departments. They had to bring in local civic groups. They had to bring in their transportation department. They had to bring in economic development all around the table to get access to these resources. And they had to write out how they were going to make sure that everyone had meaningful opportunity to be at the table before they could even get this grant from the housing department. It's called the Sustainable Communities Initiative. And that was one way to dangle a carrot in front of folks to be able to start to work together, put aside their agendas, at least for the $1 million that they had on the table to be able to access it. Again, remains to be seen how that will change behavior over the long term. But for that moment, if they find ways that they can actually save money in their individual budgets, that may be a way to create some long-term change.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, in the back.
Hello, my name is Nate Flores, and I'm a web developer for the Center for Global Development. My question goes to Dr. Oscan. I believe you talked about social media tools, right?
Oh,
Yeah, yes.
that my name may have been confused.
Okay, yeah. So, well, my question is are there any restrictions for social media tools in Turkey? And if there isn't, how do they access these tools? Is it mostly through mobile, or is it through university use, home use? And has there been any outcome of the use of these tools?
Turkey likes to censor, in a nutshell. So things like YouTube, those regularly get blocked. However, social media so far, to the best of my knowledge, has not been. So any social media such as Twitter or Facebook are open dialogue. I believe that was the first part of your question where you asked if...
Yeah. And how are people accessing these tools? Is it mostly through mobile or through home?
So mobile usage in Turkey is really high. Everybody has a cell phone, and more than computers, I would think. So most internet access is done through cell phones. In the world, cell phone internet access is increasing, and I believe there was a statistic where it's supposed to overpass actual browser computer internet access, and especially among the younger demographics, access to social media such as Twitter or Facebook, it's probably over the cell phone.
And has there been any outcome from all this social media activity besides the gatherings and the protests?
It's a boiling cauldron right now. It just gathered steam, and so far, like I said, the message was lost. There was a lot of voices. There's a lot of resentment, I would say, but it never became coherent as a single message to the authorities. And that's what we're trying to do. Going back to the thing is we're trying to generate a pool where municipalities and the users can provide a feedback loop, and hopefully a message will be conveyed a whole lot clearer this way.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Oh gosh, okay. The man in blue, and please say your name and affiliation.
My name is David Murphy. I'm a contributor with Greater Washington. And I'm kind of enamored with the 11th Street Bridge project and as sort of a conduit for overcoming the physical and psychological barrier of the Anacostia River. And I'm wondering what the cultural impact of a hypothetical similar project in somewhere like Istanbul might be, similar to the 11th Street Bridge Park project.
A project that could work to connect communities and otherwise disparate communities. And
Yes,
yeah.
in
Fascinating
Istanbul in
question.
particular. If that was the sort of, if the cultural impacts that are perceived for Washington DC would be similar or different in somewhere like Istanbul.
I'm going to actually ask, I can't answer, never been to Istanbul, I can answer that question, but I'd love to hear the response of the, how the built environment, how civic spaces can bring people together. The otherwise would be that aren't currently engaging each other. It's a fascinating question.
Well, I mean, in reality, situations like that do now exist in Istanbul. I would say probably in 10 years ago it was less because unlike most of the American cities, Turkish cities doesn't really have a zoning designation. So it's mostly mixed use. A spin-off of a European city, I should say, in certain cases like developed cities in Istanbul and Ankara and Izmir. And they used to have residential neighborhoods, but we never had a distinctive zoning that would regulate, you know, this area should be only this, but this area should be only that. So we didn't really have too much physical boundaries in between different neighborhoods, but we used to have different districts that would house different social groups. And I'm hesitant to say the current government tried to do political agendas so that more different ethnic groups and social groups in Turkey would come together and live together. But right now, from what we could track, and again, this is only my own personal idea, is that it leads to a destination that we're getting into more and more gated communities in Istanbul, and also we're districting neighbors, because the neighborhoods don't actually blend into each other, but they tend to have definite boundaries and house different income levels, different ethnicity levels, different social groups, and different cultural values as well. So I think we would be needing those kind of projects in the future because of how we're planning and how we're developing our especially large cities.
Yeah, in the United States, one of the things that I've noticed over the 35 or 40 years of my career is it used to be downtown projects were monuments. They were castles. They were, you know, they could drop in from outer space. You know, in Portland, Oregon, where I spent the first 15 years of my career, the urban renewal in the 1960s, they took out the Italian neighborhood, they took out the Jewish neighborhood, and they put in these big, boring, monolithic things that led to a revolution in thought in Portland. And so when we were doing the redevelopment of the Pearl District, the old rail yards, the old downtown, the warehousing in the north downtown, the project, you think about how you look at the project on a map and where you draw the borders of it, and people were thinking about the project looking in. And what we did is we turned it completely around and talked about the project looking out and linking to, you know, the neighborhoods that were around it. I think that's a lesson that we've learned. I think a project like the 11th Street Bridge, it's not an isolated, insular thing, it's a connector. The Pearl is a connector because you can come into that district from one neighborhood and you go out and you're in a completely different place. It didn't get dropped into Portland like you drop a Walmart into Portland or Washington, or, you know, we have, you know, you guys in the United States, we have these things that are ubiquitous and anonymous and boring and awful, and there are a lot of people that don't like them. But we have figured out, when we do it right, we have figured out how to plan urban redevelopment in a way that's sensitive to what exists and that stitches together the social fabric and can be done right. They're great examples of it, and I think those examples are translatable to other places.
I'd add to that too, that if the, just on top of that, that if the Bridge Park exists by itself, it's gonna fail, right? It's not gonna succeed. The only way it can succeed if it not only brings together the both sides of the river, and that means getting that programming balance just right, but also connecting a larger constellation of activities on both sides of the river so that you can actually engage as part of the larger Anacostia Waterfront Initiative that we're celebrating the 10th anniversary to this day. And I think what's really important about this too, just taking on the point to there too, is that there's an important, we haven't spent a lot of time talking about this, but that there's an important sense of place to this, right? And I think this is not only in our civic spaces, but also in the built environment writ large. And I think here in Washington, D.C., you see large-scale developments in particular that have a real challenge with having that sense of place. I think the National Harbor, right, you go there and there's not a patina, there's not and it's not just that the rocks are singing to you, which is kind of weird, but and not to bash sort of on National Harbor, but there's not that, it's this sort of immediate city. I think in contrast to Yards Park, I think has done that extraordinarily well. And why? Because they've connected to the larger history and fabric of the Navy Yard and this industrial front, and also they're building a building a year for the next 15 years, right? It's a long-scale development. It's not get in and get out, and I think that changes the those economics change the design of that sense of place.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mr. Fairchild.
Yeah, I'm Tom Fairchild with Mobility Lab, and fascinated by this discussion. I had an opportunity to be in Istanbul about 10 years ago. It's such a fabulous city. I'm really taken by it. I'm just curious, it seems like such a large set of issues here. What does success look like in this environment? What is, you know, like looking, you know, looking at this, you know, raised fist, what does success look like, you know, in this environment?
What does what?
Success.
Well, it depends on how we define success. I was actually just overthinking in the last question about that has to do with bridge, and I was trying to find like an example in the back of my head about what how a project like that would be created in Istanbul, or if we have created a project like that in the last 5-6 years in Istanbul. Not to my knowledge, but unfortunately, if you look at from the developer side and the government side in Turkey, the success is increasing the capacity of Istanbul in means of the developable land and number of developments. We were actually, we traveled from New York today with them, and we were just speaking on the way that there are more than 100 shopping malls in Istanbul within the metropolitan city, and it's a success for the local government. They are actually announcing this and saying there used to be only maybe 10 years or 12 years ago. Today it's more than 100. So that means the economy is doing good. That means there's more social interaction, because that's how we define. So if we have shopping malls, there's social interaction. And Istanbul is a quite large city. Yes, it is over 15 million, but I'm not sure about like 100 shopping malls, if it is a number that needs to be there or not, which is another discussion and another panel topic probably. But so it really depends on what you call success, because for a lot of things that you may criticize, this panel may criticize, I may criticize personally, or other people may criticize, might be actually success stories in Turkey. Because Istanbul, especially in the last, let's say in the last 5-6 years, really changed. And it's still beautiful, but a lot of the reserved land or passive recreational uses or lands that are not developed are actually turned into, they're rezoned and turned into developable areas. And there are more hotel rooms available. So if you look at the Wikipedia entries, it will say it's success because by late 1980s, there were little hotel rooms, almost no Class A office space, no plaza culture, no shopping malls, almost like 10 or less. But if you look at, let's say, 2010 census, it will tell you there's a lot of Class A office buildings. There's a lot of high-end residential projects like towers. The highest residential tower, one of the highest residential towers in Europe is actually in Istanbul, as far as my knowledge. And, but again, how do we measure success? Because I think our local government and our central government tends to measure success by only looking at the economic figures. And I barely see any social or cultural improvement projects in Turkey that are done by government agencies or local agencies.
I think when you talk about success and success in economic terms, we talk about the social and the environmental and the economic, but one of the things we found that resonates with a lot of decision makers, particularly in today's economy, is the economic framing jobs in the economy, and what do we do to create long-term success. Now, when I moved to Portland in 1982, we had 20% unemployment, net out-migration, more people were leaving than coming, and downtown Portland was essentially a surface parking lot. And we worked on changing our economy from a resource-based economy to a high-tech economy. And we had Intel and Fujitsu and these multinational corporations came to Oregon, and they started locating outside of Oregon in the green fields, the big fat plants and things like that between Oregon and Hillsboro. And what they found is that the people that they needed to work there, the creative class, the entrepreneurial people, the people with the talent and the drive, didn't want to live in what they called the culture-free zone. They wanted to live in town. And so business had to respond by bringing downtown back, the shops, the coffee shops and stuff like that. Millennials don't go to, well, they go to coffee shops to have fun, but they also go to coffee shops to do business. And, you know, recognizing that is what made Portland happen. When you look at DC, when I was at the University of Virginia, the district was a scary place back in the late 70s. It was a scary place to be. And where was the development happening? Tyson's Corner in Fairfax County. Look how that's flipped around. Look how that's flipped around. And the success in DC is just phenomenal. And now we're dealing with the issues of gentrification and equity and the rest of that. But compared to where we were in the 70s, that's kind of a nice problem to have, because I think we have the resources and the will to solve that. So, you know, think about your situation in Istanbul and what the long-term success is. Is the long-term success creating a place where the creative class doesn't want to be, where international business doesn't want to be, or is it taking advantage of the cultural assets that you have to make things happen? But it's framing it in that economic frame. I personally, I hate to make decisions based on economics, but I find that when you talk about the economics, the things that I love, the environmental issues and the social issues, are winners in economic terms. And, you know, that might be a direction you could consider.
Thank you. All right, in the back.
Hi, I'm Diane Perlman, School for Conflict Analysis and Resolution Officer at George Mason. And I was in Turkey 2.5 years ago for a conference, and I also went to Ankara, Istanbul, and visited people in think tanks there. So anyway, the question is, I didn't know that Ankara was our sister city, so what's involved in that? And also, there's a candidate for mayor of Washington who most embodies everything you're talking about. He's Andy Shalal. Anybody doesn't know him, and I think his headquarters is also going to be in Anacostia. So is there anything you'd like the next mayor or mayoral candidates to talk about in terms of our city and linking more with Ankara?
We're running out of time, so we will take the last 2 or 3 questions and then wrap up our discussion. So does anyone else have anything? Munire?
Oh, you want me to
Oh, I thought you raised your hand.
I have a question.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, you
We'll
want-
just lump the last 3 together.
Oh, okay. My name is Mariela ALFONZO, and I'm a volunteer for Turkish Policy Center here. As our Turkish panelists would definitely know, recently something very important happened in Turkey, and the Chamber of Architects and Engineers, which was more or less an independent organization, overnight they were transferred almost overnight to the government, some ministry in government. I don't remember which one. So what would be the future effects, and what would be the indication of, or for future projects in Turkey, since they will not be independent anymore? And if anything like this happened here in the United States, in Washington, if an agency, very important agency actually, was transferred overnight to the government or something similar, what would happen? What would people say? What would be the reactions?
Okay, one last 3rd question before we conclude. Okay.
First of all, I wanted to thank you all for sharing your knowledge with us. It was very informative to hear all the different perspectives that are involved in the infrastructure process, actually. And also from a cultural aspect, how it differentiates between 2 cultures, 2 different religions, on 2 different continents with a totally different mindset. My question refers more to, where you have mentioned sustainability and how important it is that communities and infrastructures are built with a smart way of growth and with a sustainable mindset. When I look at the growth that has happened in the Turkish infrastructure over the last decade, how do you think, and I'm not sure which one of you might be able to respond to that, how do you think the way how the infrastructure has been built or is being built is going to change the cultural aspect? Turkey having been a communal culture and now leaning more towards a compartmentalized, community-based, individualistic culture type of thing. Do you see cultural transformation? Do you see a positive change? Do you see a negative change?
Okay, thank you very much for those three great questions. I'll leave it to you who wants to answer.
I could talk a little bit about
That-
the professional societies thing. You know, I'm a civil engineer here in the United States, and I'm registered by the government. I'm a professional engineer with a license from the state of Oregon, the state of Montana, the state of Wyoming, a bunch of different places where government regulates the minimum requirements that I have to meet in order to practice as an engineer. And so that is a government function, but that doesn't prevent me from belonging to the American Society of Civil Engineers, which is a private not-for-profit organization. It doesn't prevent me from belonging to the American Institute of Certified Planners, which is a private not-for-profit. There's a National Society of Professional Engineers. There's a Society of American Military Engineers. There are lots of groups out there, and I would think that if I was a part of a group that had that was taken over by somebody I didn't agree with, I'd go start another group. You know, that happens in this country, and that might be a way forward.
Okay. Any other responses to the questions asked? We, just as a quick reminder, we had questions about the impact of urban development on the the shift away from the communal culture, and we also had a question about the sister city relationship and the upcoming mayoral election.
Can I answer yours about the society fragmenting? Well, if you consider internet part of the infrastructure, even though the society now is, more individualistic and more compartmentalized, like you said, a lot of people are using internet to communicate with each other. Maybe they're not directly in the same geography, but now you have social media, you have chat programs, you have email. So as part of the communication space, internet can be used to bring people back together. There was a news article which said technology creates a cultural spark among the Turks. As ridiculous as that sounds, internet using Turks were, they were exploring other cultures. They were looking at photographs. They were interacting with their peers a whole lot better. So even though infrastructure itself is maybe pushing people far away, internet will bring them back together.
Okay. Any other last remarks?
Just to make a comment, a brief comment about actually linking two questions. The first thing is about the Chamber of Architects and Engineers. Well, the problem with the system that sort of resulted in a conflict like this is because our central government and our chamber of, let's say, not only architects and engineers, but our not-for-profits and like NGOs, don't really have a history of working together. So usually the problem is one of them would actually create a project, and that's usually the government, and the other one would oppose and say no. Now, not that I'm in favor of in one of them or both, but I think the whole system needs to be rethink, because as far as my knowledge goes in here, and again, I'm usually, I've experienced in this in New York State, but when governments execute a project, there is actually a very big consensus table that you sit with other NGOs, other agencies, and really open up a dialogue. And is it always a nice dialogue in here? No. But is it a useful one? Definitely yes. Now the problem in our case is we don't do dialogue. So again, in our case, it's no grays. It's either black and white. So one great example for this is actually what happened during the protests about the park itself in Taksim, the Gezi Park. If you look at it, the government wanted to do something, and unfortunately the chamber had never had time to probably come up with a second design that would open the whole thing into discussion. Maybe they would have come. but actually the public did the second design for them. So they were mobile libraries, they were mobile places that people could eat, they created a community in there, and they were sort of like feeding it with the necessity of a public civic space that would serve the neighborhood, the local people, students, whoever goes and bypasses that place. So sometimes the design itself that is proposed in the first initial stage might actually be a really bad idea for environmental concerns, for local people, for a lot of things. But the idea of against the development doesn't really help it either, because then the government usually says, oh, okay, nobody wants change in here, but we need to change. And then the whole dialogue closes down. So the trick is how to keep the dialogue open, which I don't know how to, but it works. I could say at least it works in this country, but it barely works in Turkey.
All right. Well, any final remarks before we close?
Actually, one last thing about there's something I don't want necessarily wade into. I will say though that I think at least in America, we're going through a huge cultural shift right now. Millennials are an enormous population. And I was listening to a presentation the other day by Stephen Fuller, a very well-respected The Economist, looks at sort of the Washington region and how the economy is changing, and he made the point that the millennials moving back to the city and that desire to be in sort of dense urban fabric will change the way we plan cities in the similar way that baby boomers drove the suburbs and the infrastructure that followed it. That's a very simplistic sort of thing to say. It's a very complicated issue, but and I think we're seeing that in Washington, D.C., right? 1,100 to 1,300 people a month are moving to Washington, D.C. We've gained in the last 10 years 70 to 80,000 people. And I would say to whoever the leader, whether it's the continuation of the existing leadership here in D.C. or change, how do we make sure that as the economy improves in America, how do we make sure that as people have choices on where to go, how do we make sure that the Washington, D.C. continues to be an attractive place? But a key issue that is equity and affordable housing. How do we make sure that we're ensuring that the divide isn't growing larger, but the divide is getting smaller, and that means jobs and housing.
And I would add to that, education is kind of the key pathway to that, because in many ways, a lot of the folks that are moving to the area are coming with a lot of education, if you kind of break down the demographics there. And for folks who have been kind of shut out of a education system that provides quality inroads into college opportunities or good jobs with family supporting wages, if you're shut out of that, you're really shut out of kind of the future of the city and all the sets of benefits that are a part of that. So boosting the education system is something that's going to be really important for an incoming mayor.
When you look at infrastructure and urban renewal and things like that in the United States, one thing that we've learned over the last 50 years, I think, is that Americans assume that if you're not doing something with them, you're doing it to them. And if you do that, you get what you deserve.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your attention in this a very interesting international discussion. We look forward to seeing you engage with us online as we post videos, presentations, and extras from not only our two speakers who could not be with us here today, from Embark and the Chamber of Architects and Engineers, but also from State of Place, as well as from the Chamber of Architects as well. So we have at least 4 other perspectives that will be coming in the next weeks as our speakers recuperate themselves. So without further ado, I want to give a very big round of applause for our speakers who have traveled so far away. Thank you.